Hey there, it's Evan Nathaniel Grimm, and welcome to my March 2025 predictions and horoscopes. So, as per usual, I'm going to walk through the global themes and my predictions for the world at large, and then I'm going to dive into the predictions for each zodiac sign. So, I'm going to share my screen and we'll look at, first of all, again, the key moments of March and, go from there. So, just to summarize March right away, I think that in some respects, this is the last full month of feeling like we're hitting the pause button on some key aspects of our life. But I think we are also switching up the flow of energy with actually two eclipses this month. So we have the first lunar eclipse in Virgo happening on March 14th since early 2008. And we also have the last eclipse occurring in the Aries-Libra axis of the eclipse cycle that began about 2 years ago in early 2023. So I just want to clarify again that this is in March going to feature the first lunar eclipse in Virgo. So we have had solar eclipses in Virgo in recent years, meaning the mid 2010s, but you actually have to go all the way back to February of 2008 to find specifically a full moon lunar eclipse in the sign of Virgo. And obviously, 2008 completely redefined the economy and thereby, sort of the workforce. And so I'm going to walk through, obviously, what that means. I'll sort of unravel that as we go. Some of the dominant transits that I think will define the month of March include Mars square Chiron, which is ongoing. I talked about it in February as well, but Mars continues to square Chiron due to the fact that Mars will have stationed direct at 17 degrees of Cancer, still kind of in a square to Chiron, and will slowly change directions, after being retrograde. And Mars and Cancer squaring Chiron and Aries is very defensive, but assertive in any kind of defensive position. So, for example, whether or not you're a hockey fan, like me, the USA Canada Four Nations match, I think really was the epitome of Mars retrograde in Cancer squaring Chiron and Aries during a Jupiter Saturn square. We're seeing how, like for example, in the USA Canada game there were three hockey fights in the first 9 seconds. And, even though, people joke all the time about how they show up to a fight and a hockey game breaks out, there was sort of this emphasis on the tension between US and Canada during that match. And with those first three fights in the first 9 seconds of the game, we were sort of witnessing in a lot of ways this assertion of will in the spirit of defense and protection. So, like US players were fighting Canadian players after Canada was booing the US anthem. So, just to give you some context on that, again, regardless of how you feel about sports or hockey, I think that was really emblematic, actually, of some of the energy that will continue in March, alongside Venus and Mercury in Aries. So people are entering this hyper independent phase with regards to either their personal autonomy or maybe their nation. And again, with Jupiter squaring Saturn, which I still think is kind of ongoing all the way through June, we are witnessing how borders are tightening, whether that's real or imagined, meaning your own boundaries strengthening, boundaries between nations getting a little bit more, again, separate. And so as Mars continues to square Chiron in March, I think that individuals will continue to be defensive and also really quick to defend people who are perceived as downtrodden or people who are perceived as needing help. And if I actually go back to that hockey game, the first two fights actually were involving two brothers. So the first fight that broke out was with, the first brother who was a little bit smaller in stature, and his brother fought another Canadian player right after that, sort of in defense of his brother, but theoretically also in defense of the United States. So honestly, I thought that moment in the Four Nations match or tournament was like really emblematic of what's going on right now in all of our lives. Not to say that it's like literally everybody's getting into like fistfights, but I do think that people are feeling this sort of pride about something, or they are feeling very protective about something, and they are willing to, take certain risks to, again, protect whatever they care about. And so that square is going to be very grating all month continuously. So if you want to avoid that, just avoid stepping on the toes of somebody who has something to protect, right? Another conjunction here, or a conjunction of the Sun and Saturn is happening, and we also have the Neptune Sun conjunction, both in Pisces, happening during Pisces season. And what's interesting is the Sun Neptune conjunction is actually happening in Pisces for the last time in our lifetimes, because next year it will have occurred in the early degrees of Aries. But anytime we have the Sun aligning with an outer planet or a social planet, it's basically igniting this, new synodic cycle, which is basically mapping a relationship between that planet and the Sun. So think about it as a new moon hypothetically for Saturn or for Neptune. And this month of March is really going to highlight the energy of Saturn in Pisces, the energy of Neptune at the final degree of Pisces. And I think that these conjunctions will illuminate either health crises, a personal health crisis, maybe for a leader, like a political leader or a CEO or a religious figure. I mean, I know the Pope, for example, recently has been battling, I believe it's influenza or something like that, some kind of respiratory thing. I wonder if whether it's with him or someone else. I just feel like that news is sort of like presaging this Sun Neptune conjunction or even the Sun Saturn conjunction. I also think it's illuminating our own spiritual growth journeys, our mental health journeys, and also our desire to really achieve some kind of holistic health perspective through the lens of our spiritual practices, like I said, but also, through the South Node and Virgo, like really looking at, I think, our more so like tactical, nutritional, and exercise regimens. Because again, we will have a lunar eclipse in Virgo, which is going to accent actual physical health. And Pisces is a lot more about, of course, again, mental health, managing that. And Venus and Mercury will both retrograde in March, starting in the sign of Aries, moving back into the sign of Pisces. So remember that Venus is in a debilitated, or sorry, it's in its detriment in Libra, or sorry, Aries. Scrambling my words. So Venus rules the signs of Taurus and Libra, meaning that it is in its detriment in Scorpio and Aries, which are Mars-ruled signs. And it has fallen in the sign of Virgo, by the way, because it is exalted in Pisces. So with Venus being in detriment in Virgo, or wow, with Venus being in detriment in Aries and going retrograde in March and actually being retrograde in Aries for pretty much the entirety of March, I think that relationships will be a key challenge for most people. And it can be an opportunity, of course, to consider whether your individuality is being fully recognized and honored in a relationship. But it can also really showcase where maybe our hyper independence has gone too far. It can show that maybe we have allowed passion to overtake the possibility of a connection with someone or of diplomacy. So you could potentially see that at an international scale. So, for example, JD Vance, he gave a very, I don't know how to phrase it, but kind of like a scorched earth speech. I believe it was in Munich to all kinds of leaders within the European Union saying, just calling them out basically for various things. And regardless of where you stand politically, objectively, you can view that as a very Venus and Aries moment of basically asserting the values of a particular person or nation and staking some kind of, or drawing a line in the sand, basically, staking a claim almost to those values, saying like, this is what we value, and anyone who's out of accordance with that can like take a hike. So you're seeing this rhetoric become increasingly acerbic between nations, and regardless of who starts that dialogue, whether it's the United States or Russia or someone else, I think that everybody's repositioning themselves in light of the new administration in the US towards some degree of independence and operating on the assumption that aid or help from some of these imperial powers is not guaranteed. So, like a Ukraine is not necessarily going to assume anything about US aid at this point, or the The European Union is not going to assume, again, that the US would provide any kind of historic, or sorry, traditional assistance with things. So international relations is becoming increasingly frayed. But again, let's bring this to the altitude of the individual. Relations between people is also frayed, especially with Mars dispositing Venus in Aries, retrograde in Cancer, square Chiron in Aries. But even in March, when Mars is no longer retrograde, it's still squaring Chiron in Aries. So I think a lot of the reason why people will be more acerbic and more vitriolic and more independent and more combative during March is not only because Venus is in detriment in Aries retrograde, but because a lot of people are trying to create a buffer against facing their own wounds. And I say that because Venus still has to reach a conjunction with Chiron. It's stationing retrograde at 10 degrees of Aries, and that's still 10 degrees of separation from Chiron. But people can feel it, right? It's close enough to feel it, but then it retrogrades all the way back, stations direct April 12th, and then eventually it reaches a conjunction with Chiron. And when it does, people will finally admit that, hey, I have a softer side and I have some wounds and I have some issues that I have to work through. And, I maybe need help in this area. But up until then, I think people are going to be sort of toxically, well, I don't want to say toxically self-reliant, right? Like this could be a good thing for you. But for people who maybe are not introspective and they're not investigating or working on their self-improvement journey, they may put up lines of defense basically to avoid intimacy, avoid contact with others, to avoid anyone seeing their wounds. So people might be behaving badly essentially in March and selfishly. But also, if you are somebody who is codependent on someone and you've been, let's say, in a relationship that is, again, codependent and toxically codependent, perhaps the retrograde in Aries will teach you the art of self-reliance. And then you do that internal inventory, you make those upgrades such that, when Venus goes direct and eventually reaches Chiron, that you're in a really strong position to say, hey, like, I'm gonna have to heal these wounds on my own without this person who I've been relying on for too much, and for too long. With Venus, again, coming back into even Pisces too, it could teach us how to forgive also, though, somebody, and then tend to the wounds later on that way. So yeah, you can use this Venus retrograde to your advantage, obviously, just to make sure that you are self-reliant and that you are strong enough on your own. I think that's really the basis and the starting point to, really determining whether or not a relationship is, positive or toxic for you. But again, I'll talk more about that in a bit. We also, again, have Mercury retrograde in Aries and Pisces. Mercury is actually, in my opinion, very strong in Aries. Many of the smartest people I know have Mercury in Aries. But retrograde in Aries, it can lead to a sort of like revisitation of conflicts or arguments or intellectual sparring matches that you've had with people, but it can also compel some people, unfortunately, to like revisit arguments and like continue arguing and continue arguing about things from the past. And there can be some very passionate debates, but then the retrograde in Pisces, it's very nebulous, very abstract, and it's going to carry people into these like very bizarre realms where they feel very maybe confused or aimless or foggy. But it can be a great moment also to reflect on any of your maybe creative writing or some of your more creative, imaginative ideas. And certainly it would probably result in very bizarre dreams. But these retrogrades are the reason why I keep saying March is the pause button for some people still. The entire year has been a pause button. As I discussed last December, at least one of the personal planets, Mercury, Venus, or Mars, is retrograde essentially from late November of last year until mid-April of this year, give or take a week, with the exception basically at the end of February. So March continues this theme of slowing down, possibly being exhausted at times, but at least Mars is direct now. So the energy should be returning to some extent. But this month of March is a chance for you to do a full scale reflection on every type of relationship you have, whether it's a business relationship, personal, or romantic. You can reflect on, the quality of the relationship, whether or not the values are synchronized, and also Venus is an opportunity to reflect on like money, income, beauty, creativity, while Mercury retrograde in March is a chance to reflect on decisions, contracts, tech, telecommunications, communication, writing, education, all these things. And we also have Mars trine Saturn for much of this month, continuing from February. So I do think that with regards to productivity, the productivity can be fairly high, or you can at least be efficient at doing certain things connected to the Cancer and Pisces houses of your birth chart, basically. We will also, and I maybe should have started with this, we will also have Neptune finally entering Aries. And, this is a massive change because, I'll just show you in the software here, the last time that Neptune entered Aries, I believe was 1861. So, we're talking, 165 years ago. And Neptune last entered Aries, of course, on the at the beginning of the Civil War in the U.S. And Uranus was in Gemini, where it will eventually be this year. So many astrologers continue to harp on about, is there another civil war? Well, the Civil War may or may not be a metaphor or a reality, but certainly there is already a lot of civil clashes between, let's say, the governors of blue states and the Trump administration, or district judges and the Trump administration, and like Doge. And like every time Trump tries to fire a broad swath of the federal branch, a judge steps in and says no. So yeah, there are legitimate clashes going on already, but and civil disputes. But I would say again, this is historic by definition because again, this is the first time since 1861, 1862, basically, that Neptune has entered the sign of Aries. So I want to go back to now just to have, again, a reference point before I go in through the month. But I just wanted to mention that, again, Neptune going into Aries, and by the way, it'll be there for about 13 years. Neptune going into Aries is going to set a new collective ideal because Neptune has a lot to do with our dreams, our ideals, our spirituality, areas of our life where we may become deceived, though, and it's almost like a channel through which we can be deceived. And Neptune has been in its home sign since 2011. So since 2011, we have witnessed Neptune's power and potency in all of its myriad forms, which can be amazing. We've obviously seen a sort of golden age of television, I think, because of this. We have seen these massive, amazing creative feats, but we've also witnessed the doling out of some of the most addictive drugs in human history, which is social media. So you think about Instagram really taking off in 2012 during Neptune's sort of entry into Pisces. You think about how the majority of Americans, I think, started to own a smartphone, or like the smartphone reached a majority adoption in the US around 2012, as far as I remember. So since about the time Neptune went into Pisces, we've had these addictive devices which are powering these even more addictive platforms in the case of like a TikTok or an Instagram. So also we've witnessed how mass media can alter and fabricate narratives to try to achieve a certain objective or push an agenda. And that goes across the political aisles. Not trying to stake a claim here to like one side or the other. I think networks on both sides of the aisle have pushed these ridiculous stories over the past, many decades probably as well, but even more so recently that have sort of whipped people around back and forth and they've not really known which extreme to like believe in, and that has divided and conquered the populace. But I think as Neptune goes out of Pisces, even though again it's not in its home sign anymore, I kind of welcome that. I feel like again, Neptune in Pisces has made a lot of us very passive because what's happening when you're staring at a screen or looking at your social media account is like you're not moving. It's a very passive process. So we've been consumers to the nth degree lately. And as consumers, we're not engaging our core. We're sitting down. I'm sitting down as I'm filming this so that I can broadcast on social media, which is the ultimate irony, of course. And so lately, I've been like anticipating this transit of Saturn and Neptune going into Aries this year. And I'm like doing a lot more strength training and I'm trying to build my core up. I'm trying to, build up my glutes. I'm trying to get my biceps bigger. And it's like, number one, because I think April 2026, like there's so much Aries happening in April of 2026 that, very well there could be like some kind of global war that I think, people might as well be in like physical shape for, just being completely honest with you. But I also think that, we're getting ripped out of this immersive dreamland that I'm not saying is going to go away because we're going to continue to see the acceleration of technology, but I think that we will witness, we will basically witness this sort of visceral transition into something where maybe our survival needs are way higher, like in the priority list, where we have to consider our survival needs much more. But also, we're reaching an era where we might revere strength in a different way, revere courage, revere, risk taking in a different way. Whereas, like, the Pisces transits has created this sort of like, um, I don't know if I want to say victim mentality, but I do think there's some of that. And I think it's great, to see like humanitarian groups come together and like charitable causes scaling up. Like, I'm not saying that that's all wrong, but I think that as a society, people would agree, hopefully, that we've reached a certain like state of health where like, life expectancy is declining and, birth rates are, I think, declining because people like, they don't even feel like really motivated to do that, to create life when they're not like creating, we're not engaging with life, right? So I think there's something to that. So so I have to be philosophical, of course, as we're talking about Neptune. Neptune is naturally going to be very, again, abstract. But I think as Neptune goes into Aries, people will start to almost like, again, revere this heroicism and be a little bit less um charitable in their interpretation of people who say like, oh, I am like, woe is me, my life is awful and I need help. Like, I'm not saying that there's not people who need help. I'm not saying that there's not people who, for example, need like medical assistance or something. But I think that people will start to adopt this more individualistic attitude. And whether that's within their own community, within their own neighborhood, within their own country, or just within themselves, it varies, right? And I think we are witnessing this year how, again, there's a separation of nations going on. There's a fracturing within nations. So I'm just being honest. I think we're getting into, again, into April of 2026, especially. Go like look at April 2026 and look at the astrology of that month. It's like most of the planets are in Aries at that time, including Mars in its home sign. So I think we are building up to this sort of like wartime in about 14 months. And we're just going to see little flashes of it now, as Neptune and Saturn go into Aries, where certain systems begin to collapse with Saturn and Neptune conjoining for the first time since 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell. We are going to see certain boundaries being redrawn and changing, but also we're going to see these individualistic assertive moves by nations, by neighborhoods, by communities, by people that will stoke the flames of war. I just think that's probably what's going to happen. Because once Mars and Neptune come together in April of 2026, like to me, along with Saturn, that's almost like Saturn is obligation, Neptune is sacrifice, and Mars is attack. So people are in fighting. So people are almost like fighting on behalf of a cause, fighting on behalf of some heroic figure that they have in their mind. And that creates space, by the way, for a dictator, obviously. I'm not saying it's all good. You could revere, let's say, an athlete for throwing a touchdown pass, but you could also revere like a Napoleon type person in the wake of like all this instability. So some people might attach themselves to a strong leader who actually has very vicious intentions. So that part of it does worry me a little bit. But I'm going way, way ahead of myself, by the way. So I'm projecting into April of next year. So, if you're not someone who really wants to plan for the future and you don't want to be worried about anything, then you can skip over that. But again, I think there's a reasonable, not 100%, reasonable probability that conflict will increase between countries over the next 14 months. Kind of crescendoing again to April. If there's no conflict going on in April of 2026, then honestly, I feel like we've probably gotten away from we've probably dodged that, right? We've probably dodged that possibility. But if you look at where the world's heading, and we also look at the transits in May, which I won't show you today, but basically Mars is going to oppose Pluto again. Well, Uranus is back on Algol, with actually, by the way, Mars on Trump's Pluto at that time when Uranus is back on Algol. So, there is a lot of posturing still. We have to get through this entire Mars cycle and this retrograde cycle, including the post-shadow phase, to fully grasp what's going on here. And so while you could see, oh, there's peace talks, for example, between like Israel and Gaza, and we also have the possibility of peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, we also see how there's coalitions being broken up, especially as it concerns the US. So as these coalitions are fractured, cooperation is less likely. And again, we are still, even from the perspective of that, in the eclipse cycles of Aries and Libra, which is crescendoing into mid-April with the Libra full moon, which is not an eclipse, but it still is the 6-month conclusion of the Libra solar eclipse last October. And the South Node in Libra at that time had a lot to do with purging alliances. So alliances are continuing to disintegrate in some ways. But yeah, anyways, that's what I think Neptune and Aries will partly be about. And we also do have Mercury and Venus in their inferior conjunctions with the Sun towards the end of March, which is a very clarifying moment, and I think that should be welcomed. So if you find yourself confused about, let's say, your relationships, your job during Venus retrograde, look forward to the Cazimi. I think it's around March 22nd, when that's the midpoint of the retrograde, and you will have sort of a full cognitive awareness about maybe how you want to approach relationships, approach creativity, approach your finances. And then the same with Mercury towards the end of the month, conjoining the Sun, illuminating the sort of decision you have to make. So now let's go into the key ingresses, by the way. So the key ingresses, meaning the key moments when a planet enters a new sign, are Mercury going into Aries March 3rd, Venus going into Pisces March 27th, Mercury going back into Pisces March 29th. And by the way, Venus in Pisces is a retrograde, going back into Pisces. So it's not really an ingress, but anyways, the Sun goes into Aries March 20th and Neptune goes into Aries March 30th. In terms of retrograde and direct, I know I talked about this, but just to time it out, Venus stations retrograde March 1st at 10 degrees of Aries to kick off the month, which is a reflection with Venus retrograde on style, beauty, art, relationships, money, self-worth, in the Aries ruled house of our birth charts, by the way. And I would not advise that you get into a relationship during Venus retrograde, unless you both have Venus retrograde in your birth chart. Entering a relationship or making vows during a Venus retrograde makes it less likely that it's going to last. Mercury will station retrograde March 14th at 9 degrees of Aries, similar point in the zodiac. And during that time, you'll be reflecting on decisions, contracts, transportation, technology, discussions, and travel. So now I'm going to reshare my screen and go through the day-by-day transits. So let's review the day-by-day transits. Starting with March 1st, actually. Through March 3rd, we have a Mercury North Node Neptune conjunction in Pisces. And the first few days with that conjunction in Pisces could be foggy, they could be confusing. There could be also some announcements about health agencies, health care, oil supplies, about storms. There could be some roadways cut off in light of a massive storm. There could also be reports about opioids or some addictive, substances. There could be also maybe some. I know I talk about accidents a lot, but there could be some accidents in the news, but specifically at that time about regarding let's say a bicycle crash in the rain or a car crash on an icy road or some sort of transportation incident due to like wet conditions, inclement weather. But with the alignment to the North Node, I think in your personal life, you could really start to like channel very profoundly and tap into some really deep spiritual insights that are productive towards your destiny and revealing of your destiny, because the North Node is also connected to this. So this could even be like a dream you have at night that is so profound that it inspires you to do something, or maybe you have a healing session with somebody that is life-changing, or maybe somebody at the grocery store just tells you something psychically channeled. But I think that there will be these mystifying messages coming through at that time, in addition to the confusion. And maybe the sort of learning of a health condition. I'm not trying to manifest that for people, but I think that for some people they could like become aware of some kind of health related fact or something at that time. But it could be an insight, right? It could be an insight about how to treat an addiction or mental health or spiritual health related thing. And then from March 11th to the end of the month, really, we have Mercury conjunct Venus, whether they're both retrograde or not, right? So you can see it there heading into March 11th, especially. We have that conjunction of Mercury and Venus. And then, Mercury goes retrograde shortly thereafter on the 14th. So it basically follows Venus retrograde back into Pisces. So those retrogrades with Mercury following Venus are going to lock a lot of people back into like old relationships, honestly, but especially relationships where there seems to be this air of like unresolved conflict. So if people are dissatisfied with how a relationship ended or they feel like they still have grievances, some exes may come back and demand an apology or demand something like maybe their possessions, like maybe they want the chair from you after all or something. Or maybe they just assert themselves and say, "Hey, I didn't appreciate how that relationship ended, or I don't appreciate how you treated me." But there was some anger there. I think there's some legitimate, I don't want to say legitimate, but like there's just some anger there between exes. And also Aries rules the head and like headaches. So I think during Mercury retrograde in Aries, even when it's aligned with Venus, people could be, well, hopefully not getting too many headaches, but like at the very least, also with Venus retrograde, people might be reevaluating the way they present themselves. Whether it's like their hairstyle or, let's say my mustache or something, or the way they approach, the way they treat their faces, because Aries has a lot to do with the face and the head. So people will be, because like when Venus retrogrades, it's like a reevaluation of like beauty standards and approaches to like beauty and style and fashion. So people might literally be like reevaluating sort of facial care. They might also, be trending towards fashion choices that are uniquely their own, which I know is like almost more of an Aquarian thing. But I also think that with Aries, there will be a lot of fashion choices that are sort of, again, staunchly individualistic. But also with the international discord right now, I think a lot of people will either buy clothing from their domestic markets. So, like if you're a United States citizen, maybe you would start buying clothes made in the US or with like a USA logo on it or something. And same for other countries. So I think there's a real patriotic sort of trend going on in March with like attire and clothing in this sort of way. And yeah, so I mean, of course, it's other things too. Like I said, more generally, just like style and fashion choices that honor the individual preferences, basically. But yeah, that Mercury retrograde, Venus retrograde alignment in Aries is going to bring a lot of people out of the woodwork. Again, anyone in your life who feels like there was an imbalance in the relationship or they didn't get to say everything they needed to say, they might come back. So if you like really don't want to have that conversation, maybe preemptively block your ex or something. Or if you do want to have that conversation, be welcome to having a kind of a heated debate. I think it would get a little bit, a little chippy there. So, anyways, we also have the Sun-Saturn conjunction around March 12th, right on the eve of the eclipse, the lunar eclipse. And I'm just going to show you the lunar eclipse right there. The Sun-Saturn conjunction, again, is the planting of a seed of this new Sun-Saturn cycle for the next year or so. And this Sun-Saturn cycle is, very powerful because, if you fast forward about a year, the next Sun-Saturn cazimi will be in the sign of Aries. So going backwards to now, with actually both conjunctions of Neptune and Saturn in the Sun. These are the last two synodic cycles of Saturn, Neptune, and Pisces for a long time. For Neptune, it'll be, well over 150 years, basically. And for Saturn, it will be, another 29 or 28 years when Saturn next enters Pisces. So we are really seeing here, because we've had time, right, to live with this Neptune and Saturn transit in Pisces, but like this Sun alignment with Saturn is going to illuminate our own, I think, healing journeys, but also it will show us what we still need to heal at a mental and spiritual level in order to feel like we can kind of like participate and cohere with society again. I've noticed a lot of people say that they feel like hermits still. They still feel like they don't want to connect with people. They need a lot of alone time. I think that is very Saturn and Neptune and Pisces, actually. But I think the Sun aligning with Saturn will, number one, maybe show you a different pathway to, dealing with that health journey so that you can get back out there, or it will illuminate your ideal goals with like a creative or spiritual practice or project. I think a lot of people, when the sun aligns with Saturn, sort of embark on this new long-term professional journey or project. And it's also very fortunate though that we're out of the post-shadow phase with Saturn too, by the way. So you can start something. And by the way, I'm not saying you should start something from scratch per se because it's during a lunar eclipse. I'm not saying you should necessarily start something on the 12th and 13th, but at least it's planting the seeds for that idea. Because obviously, starting something on a lunar eclipse, not a great idea, but at least you are envisioning how you want to be seen in the world with Saturn, but in Pisces especially, how you want to heal those around you, or how maybe you are a data analyst right now who wants to become a Reiki healer. This is like maybe a time for you to make that transition. I've noticed a lot of people are starting to embrace their spiritual gifts to a fuller extent, and maybe they are starting to pursue entrepreneurship. Um, Other people with Venus retrograde in Aries, though, might reevaluate whether they should be an entrepreneur. Maybe they will second guess their entrepreneurial journey. And with Sun aligning with Saturn, they're asking for help basically to say, like, well, I am burned out. I am exhausted. My mental health is not great. I need to rethink how I'm approaching money, how I'm approaching finance, how I'm approaching business. So in some cases, that could be true. But ideally, it's providing the scaffolding for a long-term dream. And then as we reach the Kazemi, and sorry, one more thing I'll say about that is to be honest, again, I should probably stop saying that, qualifying my statements, but this could underscore a chronic health issue for some people. It could illuminate a health issue that someone has to tend to, but it wouldn't be a sudden ailment. It'd be more of a chronic autoimmune or, just a wear and tear sort of thing. I don't know, not necessarily like an arthritis, but like just something Saturnian, and with the sun being father figures, maybe it's somebody's like father, but it could also be that you are becoming aware of what you still have to tend to with regards to your own health. And then we're going to get the also again the Neptune Sun Kazemi a few days after that. So if I go to basically the end of Pisces season, March 19th. The Sun Neptune North Node conjunction is highlighting all things related to Neptune. So mass media, spirituality, addiction, health, healthcare. And in some ways, I know Sagittarius is more associated with like religion, but there's something with faith at that time, or humanitarianism even. So I think the Sun Neptune conjunction could accent this shift towards some kind of spiritual movement, or there's a spiritual event, or there's a musical event, or maybe people are again cognizing what their spiritual mission is or purpose. And going back to the Saturn Sun conjunction, I wonder if that even accents like something with like a water supply issue, water quality issue, or maybe again, even a leader is showing signs of aging, or a leader, a prominent figure announces that they have a chronic condition they have to deal with now. But even the Sun Neptune conjunction could illuminate sickness in some way, juxtaposed with the lunar eclipse in Virgo that we're having, on March 13th, 14th. That honestly could be some kind of pandemic striking. Like, if there was a pandemic in 2025, it would either be triggered in March or September. The reasons being because that's when the eclipses are happening in Virgo and Pisces, which again has a lot to do with health, toxins, pollutants, pathogens. And we had the COVID pandemic during the North and South Node in Gemini and Sag, which are mutable signs as well. And by the way, the lunar eclipse in Virgo on March 13th is creating a square with Donald Trump's Sun, Uranus, Moon, North Node, and South Node. So it's like a grand mutable cross in his chart. So even like, and by the way, squaring his Sun, which is his chart ruler, as a Leo rising. So no matter what actually happens in literality, I guess, it will involve Trump. Like Trump will be somewhat implicated in that lunar eclipse. And I think it might have something to do with, his alliances with other leaders. It could show that there's some constriction for him, meaning some other prime minister or president, decides to completely cut off the relationship with the US or with Trump, or Trump loses the support of some of his colleagues in Congress. I mean, possibly an impeachment trial, but there will definitely be these monumental efforts to try to stall his progress as president. I really think that that's what's going on there. And also that there is some high degree of, there is, I shouldn't say some high, but like high degree of probability that there's some sort of scare about a pathogen or a I don't know if it's like a bio weapon per se, but it just feels like there is this dissemination of a potentially a viral or bacterial thing. And again, it could even be through like a water supply, or it could be through tainted food or something, contaminated food. Especially with Uranus still being in Taurus, and other ways as well. But anyways, we also have Venus and Mercury sextiling Pluto towards the end of the month, basically the last week of the month. And Venus and Mercury will have already sextiled Pluto, earlier, but the retrograde sextile to Pluto is a reevaluation of investing and financing strategies, also business planning, I think, in some ways, financial restructuring, but also in relationships, it can deepen intimacy, especially in Aries. It's like people are looking for passion in their relationships. So I think the worst position someone could be in right now is like in a relationship that is romantic but stagnant, like in the bedroom, where there's no there's no passion anymore. So if you need to like get the mojo back, I mean, I don't know, like that's a personal journey, obviously. So get it back however you need to, but like the sextile to Pluto could like help people with that. It could help people at the end of March be like, okay, like I can bring the sparks back through XYZ means. And I think in some cases secrets could come out, but a sextile is a pretty subtle aspect in my experience, and it's not necessarily bad. It's just sort of like a passive thing. So I don't want to overplay the sextile. And if I'm being real with you, I think trines are overplayed too. That's the secret to my success as an astrologer, I think, as a reader, when I do one-on-one readings. I tend not to focus on sextiles and trines all that much. It's sort of like a passing comment. I will like realize that they're there and mention them, but I don't think it's the crux of like why someone comes to see me. And I don't think that's how people master their chart, is by like just trying to lean into their trines and sextiles. It's about conquering and kind of like, right sizing your squares, conjunctions, oppositions, your inconjuncts, even like a semi-square or something. But like, some of these more tense aspects are dynamic, but they need to be dealt with. But the sextile and the trine are way, way overplayed by astrologers. That's why, like, when you watch a video from somebody saying like, hey, like all the air signs are like 100% going to benefit from, Uranus trining Pluto in the early degrees or whatever because they're getting trines. I don't know if I agree with that, right? Like in the astrological theory, they would, but it's like a passing ship in the night sometimes. I have a lot of trines in my chart, but I wasn't using them until, honestly, probably until I was like 30, and until I became aware of astrology, really. So it's just sort of like a tangent, but I don't want people to like overplay this sextile here. So, but it is there, so we might as well mention it. We also have a Mercury Cazimi. I've already talked about that. March 24th, clarification of any kind of mental decision-making processes. Venus Cazimi right before that, March 22nd, which is a clarification of, relationships and creativity, beauty, any Venusian theme. And then we go into late March, very end of March, we get Venus retrograde conjunct Neptune, the North Node, and Saturn. So by the time we get to like March 27th, like look at that, even the moon there, it's like we're all kind of locked into Pisces there. I mean, that could reveal a lie within a relationship, conjunct Neptune. It could reveal a sort of a new creative breakthrough for you, though, as well. And it could help you finally forgive somebody, finally let go of the negative emotion to reunite with them. So it's like if you're not, if you're not willing to let go yet of an ex, maybe it's because you haven't forgiven them for something. So there's your opportunity. Or maybe you want to get back with someone, but they won't forgive you. There's a door opening for forgiveness on March 27th. I really believe that all the way through the end of the month. Because the North Node is there. This is divine love. These are divinely guided relationships. And also, though, with the approach in conjunction to Saturn, which is really exact in mid-April, people are going to be feeling a lot of pressure to finally commit to somebody for the long haul. Could be an ex, could be someone you're already with, who you've been feuding with for a long time. And again, I'll stress this, do not start a relationship during Venus retrograde. Don't set vows during a Venus retrograde unless you both have Venus retrograde. Like, just don't do it. It's if you already have a wedding planned for, mid or March 1st through April 12th, I'm not telling you to cancel the wedding, but you should have definitely consulted an astrologer unless you already did and they realized that, oh, you both have Venus retrograde. Congrats. But otherwise, it's like, what are you doing? So, anyways, we also have, with Venus Saturn, a lesson at the core of this conjunction. So, this is complicated, right? Like Venus Neptune, Venus North Node, Venus Saturn, it's all telling me different things. But if you combine them, it's basically saying you have to be with someone who you can forgive for things, who you love unconditionally, maybe, and at least at a divine level. But also, there is no perfect person. Like you have to be willing to sacrifice something to be with that person. You have to be willing to do the boring work occasionally for that person. You have to be willing to do literal work and chores for that person, or you have to be willing to show up for that person and give up something else to get that relationship. So we've had Venus and Saturn dancing around the zodiac for years now in on all these eclipses and like Aries and Libra. A lot of them have featured Venus Saturn aspects. So with the final the final full moon in Libra connected to the Libra Aries eclipse cycle that's coming April 12th, it's like we're all realizing that, again, relationships take work. If we want a relationship to last, we have to understand opportunity cost and accept that. There is no such thing as a win-win-win-win-win in a relationship. Everybody loses something by being in a long-term relationship. That's like the Saturnian truth of it. But also the Neptunian side of the coin or the cube is like saying, hey, but like there is a lot of divinity that you can discover within yourself through that relationship. But like nobody's gonna sit there and be like, oh yeah, a relationship can be like hyper indulgent and long term and satisfying, like all like and fulfilling. Like it's not. It can't be all the above. It can't be like gratifying, pleasurable, hedonistic, meaningful, enriching, and all of the above all at the same time. Even though maybe in the astral plane or in the dream world, we can like be with thousands of people or whoever we want or whatever. It's like in the 3D plane, our lives are enriched, I think, by choosing somebody, or at least choosing, let's say, a friend or a business partner. I mean, it doesn't have to be romantic, but like we all have to come to terms with the fact that our soul has chosen to aim for certain outcomes, a specific list of outcomes, I think, in this lifetime. And even though life has infinite permutations in a way, I still think we're existing within a certain reincarnation cycle relevant to our chart. And That includes, I think, when it comes down to it, certain binary choices. Like, are you going to be with that person or not? Are you going to take that job or not? So we live in this age of like instant gratification and infinite gratification, but Saturn shows us that we have to sacrifice gratification at some point in order to stabilize around something, whether it's a marriage or a job or whatnot. I think we live in this really loosely defined world now where you can make 50K a month just by existing. And while those opportunities are great, it also sort of like creates this what's the point sort of question. So people, I think, want to feel like something in their life or someone in their life is valuable. And it's only valuable because you sacrificed something to get it. Why is a Cartier watch, valuable? It's because, you drop like 10 grand to get one and you feel a connection to that watch because you spent so much money on it. And obviously, it doesn't have to be materialistic. It could be like, again, you flew across the country to like help your best friend through a mental health crisis. That is a sacrifice. You could have been doing other things by staying where you were. But that sacrifice enriches the relationship. So we all have to come to terms with that around the end of March, really, into mid-April. Then March 29th, all the way through the end of the month, we have Mercury joining the party, conjoining Neptune, Saturn, the North Node, all in Pisces, and that is along with Venus there, and Neptune has gone into Aries at that point too, I guess. But essentially, this is still a conjunction of Neptune and Mercury. This is all pointing us basically by the end of March to our life's work and our life's purpose. It's like, and maybe for some of you, you're reaching, because we're reaching the end of the zodiac there, we're reaching the end of a macro cycle in our lives where we no longer want to hold on to something. We want to let something go in order to finally move or to finally just like end that career and that relationship and open the door to some other energy. So some of you are closing massive chapters. Because the North Node is there too, some of you are also realizing that you are being called by your spirit guides to become an actor, to become a musician, to become a writer, or whatever it is. And with Neptune going into Aries, you're almost revering the people who have taken a chance on that. So, like, for example, I am an astrologer. I'm also a musician, though. So I continue to have this dream that someday I'll go back to becoming a performing musician. I'm also a writer. I wrote a fictional book recently, and I have a dream of getting that published. And, I know it's going to take work to get there. But I also know that, with Neptune and Aries, it's like I'm probably going to be idealizing the people who took a chance on that themselves, people who decided to risk it all to become that musician or that author or that engineer or whatever they did. And like that will inspire me to like lunge further into it. So like what is that for you basically? And when I think about the sign of Aries, I think about becoming one of one. So like what makes you one of one? How can what makes you unique? How do you define that? You know? Like for me, it's like, am I the astrologer with the chest hair? Or are you the person who collects antique books? Or are you the person who, you want to become the first person to fly to Mars or something? I don't know. But like, how do you want your legacy to be summarized in one sentence? Uh, I hope I become more than just the astrologer with chest hair, by the way. But like, whatever it is for you, how do you define yourself in a way that makes you one of one? That will be a key question during Neptune and Aries. And I think, again, during these retrogrades in Pisces, it's like, what is fulfilling you at a divine level? And then again, I talked about Mars square Chiron the whole month, Jupiter square Saturn. I still think is at play this whole month, but really into June, so I won't mention that really. But I will just say there, still some big legal battles going on, both internationally, nationally, and personally. Not necessarily me, but I'm just saying in people's personal lives, they may have legal battles. And then Mars is beginning to oppose Pluto at the very end of the month. right? Like orb of influence, it counts inside of 10 degrees there to Pluto. And then, April and May will be the exact opposition with Mars and Pluto. That's tense. Like it feels like somebody or people are really girding for conflict. They're still resenting something or someone. They're not over something yet. I don't know. I have a lot of apprehension about the state of the world right now. I mean, Mars has been opposing Pluto kind of off and on, right? Since November. That's like real resentful. That's vengeful. A lot of people are Mars retrograde in Cancer, square Chiron and Aries, like they're feeling vengeful about matters related to their domestic homeland or their country or their family, their property. It feels continuously vicious. And pretty much until like I think mid-May, we're dealing with this Mars-Pluto opposition. So even like a month from end of March, mid-April, still got it going on. May 7th still happening. It's not until about May 15th that we get out of it. So yeah, that's pretty messed up. And even at that time, Venus is basically, yeah, it's still in post shadow. Like that's yeah, that's very combative, very vengeful. It does feel like there is like a fire, you know, baking beneath the surface. It's like a volcanic eruption. I wouldn't be surprised if there's like a massive volcanic eruption actually between late March and mid-May. And yeah, just in general, a lot of vengeful behavior. And anyway, so like to summarize the transits in March, I think that there is, um, there's this feeling of contemplativeness, if that's a word, or reflection. I mean, Pisces season is, and I'll stop sharing my screen actually because I want to like just kind of bring this back to a center, a sense of centeredness. So essentially, the way that I see Pisces, or sorry, not Pisces, but March going is that at first it is kind of like quieting down from Aquarius season because we get out of the Sun Uranus square, we get out of the frenetic energy of the Leo full moon, which was really tough for the fixed signs. And so in some respects that could make Pisces season almost depressing though, like there's a almost a focus on like mental health and healing and isolation and it could be a very somber, quiet month for some of you. But this is the reflecting that we all need to do in order to number one, make sure that we are self-reliant, but also to make sure that we're tapped into our life's purpose and our potential. Because the retrograde is going back into Pisces aligned with Saturn and Neptune. And the North Node is showing us that we have to really be fulfilled by what we're doing, but that we may have to let go of some other things in the process to clear space for that, to allow ourselves to even align with the universe in that way. And, as we go into Aries season, I didn't mention this yet, but we will have a partial solar eclipse in Aries at 9 degrees of Aries at the end of the month. So by the end of the month, you should start to feel like your relationships are actually somewhat of a win-win. I know I talked about how there's no win-win, win-win-win in a relationship, but there can still be a win-win, at least in a relationship, meaning you're coming into a relationship or you only have relationships where both parties are understood and seen and their independence is honored, but also they have faith in each other, they can trust each other, they can unify around something, they could create together, they could meditate together, they could connect with some kind of divine presence together and feel fulfilled by one another without needing each other. I think that that is something that we're all trying to do. But also with the retrogrades going from Aries to Pisces, people want financial autonomy, they want intellectual autonomy, while still, uh, again, tapping into something that is connected to the collective and healing others. So like a lot of spiritual entrepreneurs could emerge from this month of March. So let me go back to the screen just to again that was a level setting thing. And I have one more section to go through by the way before we get into retro or the horoscopes. So let's do that now. So I'm going to circle back to February quick. So February was defined by aviation disasters, which myself and many other astrologers predicted. I mean, that was not necessarily a tough prediction to make in the sense that, you saw Mercury conjunct Pluto in Aquarius, sign of aviation, this full moon squaring Uranus, Uranus ruling Aquarius. But when I think back to the American Airlines disaster, I've had some time to reflect on it since my podcast about it, and I still continue to believe that the helicopter pilot intentionally did it. I think that they intentionally elevated to collide with the plane. Because when I was channeling in December discussing January transits, I kept saying how the Mercury opposite Mars retrograde in Cancer aspect, square Chiron, did feel like there was someone inside the government acting against their own government, almost like a betrayal, and that is similar to like collateral damage or sort of a self-inflicted wound. So I think, unfortunately, I do think that the American Airlines crash was a coercive event on the part of the helicopter pilot. But I don't have any evidence outside the astrology in my own psychic channel to corroborate that. So, don't report that as gospel or anything. But I think that um, I do face reading as well based on my face reading of the pilot of the helicopter. I think that they were intentional about it. There was something bizarre. There was something I don't know how to describe it. It was almost felt like there was. Yeah, I don't really want to go into it actually. For some reason, I feel like I have to protect that. But I'm just going to let you know that I think it was intentional. Also, we had shifting international relations, obviously. I just told you earlier about the JD Vance speech in Munich. Obviously, that reset a lot of the relations between US and Europe, specifically frayed relations. We also had some tariffs issued by the Trump administration and a gutting of the federal government. And I want to pause there and say something that is my objective. I think is objective. Okay, I don't think I'm inserting any political bias here. I think objectively, if you think about the themes that myself and many other, pretty much every astrologer on Earth have been talking about for the past few years, like what have we been talking about? We have been talking about breaking up systems, that systems would be dismantled. It's like you could go back to like hundreds of videos I've been posting across social media platforms saying systems will be dismantled, the foundation will not stay solid, there will be a decentralization of things. And some astrologers were saying that the Pluto and Aquarius era would bring about a certain egalitarianism, and that because of that, Harris was going to win. But like if you really break it down and you like look into the messages that astrologers have been conveying, regardless of their political beliefs, we are seeing a dismantling of the federal government, which is like the prime system, at least in the US, that you could like think of when you conceive of a centralized bureaucracy. And I'm not ascribing any value, positive or negative, to that event. I'm just telling you objectively that that is exactly Pluto and Aquarius. As is the almost TikTok ban. That's also control of social media and censorship issues and blah, blah, blah. But the approach that's being taken right now by Doge is also perfectly in line with what I said on YouTube 2 years ago. I should actually pin that video to my page because I still think that it is the most sort of prophetic video I've done. Because in that video, I literally talk about how AI will eventually replace governing bodies. Like the federal government itself will become obsolete in the next few decades, probably in the next 20 years. Like eventually AI will allow people to assemble their own constitution. They will be able to put up their own like maybe drone-based borders and defense systems. They will be able to draft, yeah, their own entire like Bill of Rights. They will like so think about like Burning Man. Like the whole Burning Man community could start their own country or society eventually. Or there could be digital countries, digital societies, like in our sort of immersive realities. But even though Elon Musk is not himself an AI, as far as I know. He's deploying AI, or at least trying to deploy AI to basically, quote unquote streamline bureaucracy. And again, in the YouTube video over 2 years ago that I filmed, I literally said AI will be used to govern completely differently. AI will transform government. And I said that it would happen by the time Pluto's in Aquarius full time. So in a lot of ways, astrologically, this is all happening exactly in accordance with what you'd expect. So, you know, so you're allowed to, as your own subjective viewer, to say, well, this is a billionaire, unelected billionaire takeover of the government. And I know that a lot of people have that opinion, and they've been, protesting about it. But you could also look at it through the lens of Pluto and Aquarius as, okay, this is somebody, good or evil, who's looking at a power center and conceiving of ways to decrease the potency and centralization of that power center. Now, what happens in the wake of that, I'm not telling you that it's good or bad. Does it create a vacuum in power? Do we have a full-time autocracy eventually and a Napoleonic figure rising, Is there so much distrust in the government that a dictator officially does set a different constitution in place or whatever you want to call it, or a different set of rules? I mean, yeah, Neptune and Aries, Saturn and Aries could see the rise of certain, whatever, autocratic, plutocratic leaders. Although we already are in a plutocracy, right? We already are in a system run by the powerful. So I'm not even, again, I'm not saying that Elon Musk is good or bad for the government. I'm just saying that, yeah, maybe he is just an extension of the plutocracy because he is another billionaire who's trying to like influence things just more overtly. But like it is technically kind of Aquarian to say, okay, well, at least on the veneer of the initiative, they are trying to flatten or horizontalize, I'll make up a word, the federal level of something. And, as someone who went to an elite university that was definitely, you know, chock full of administrators, I think, I wonder if, like, for example, my university, my alma mater, do they need, more administrators than students? I mean, I don't know if that's the exact ratio, but like, there are legitimate questions that we should be asking during the Saturn-Pluto cycle in Capricorn that started in 2020 about the bureaucracy. Obviously, it should be done in a way that's transparent and, just, and in a way that's supporting the national security interests of the country. Like, I'm not so stupid that I'm just going to like, showcase and convey a binary decision or opinion there. Like my Mars Gemini doesn't play it that easy. Like, hopefully, I actually don't think that anybody who watches my content actually knows what I believe politically, which is really my goal, by the way. And it's funny because whenever I post like live videos on Instagram or even YouTube, I read the comments and it like half the comments are saying believe that I'm saying one thing, half of people think I'm saying the other thing. And in both cases, they're kind of like a mixture of right and wrong in their comments. So I think it's like my intention to be ambiguous, honestly. But but if you believe that you understand my politics, then feel free. I throw it into the comments. But I don't like to make it that easy. Anyway, so February was defined by plane crashes, shifting international relations, storms, earthquakes, tsunami warnings, volcanic eruptions, which I think there will be more volcanic eruptions, and then again, tensions rising between US and Europe, US and Canada. So now I'm going to jump again. I know there's a lot going on in this video, but like, let's go now into, I'm going to set a midpoint for March while I'm talking here, but like, let's just go through some of the other key themes really quick. So we have Venus retrograde from March 1st to April 12th. Remember that Venus retrograded in Aries and Pisces last in March and April of 2017. So themes from that time could present themselves again for you. Reflect on your creative, financial, or relationship consistencies, consistent themes across these past 8 years. And then any decisions, that you made regarding Venusian themes during the pre-shadow phase, which I believe started in January of at some point. I think it was like mid-January, basically, like January, yeah, like late January. But anyways, any decisions you made in the Venusian category during the pre-shadow is subject to be revisited um, during the retrograde. Mercury will retrograde. I guess I already talked about that. Yeah, I guess I talked about most of these themes. Yeah, I guess I already talked about these themes. I just want to mention though some other themes of Virgo and Pisces. So we will be experiencing a lunar eclipse in Virgo again for the first time since February of 2008. And during February 2008, we had the Great Recession, obviously. So the Virgo lunar eclipse, first of all, it will accent both Virgo and Pisces themes. So some Virgo themes include administrators, accountants, animals, the abdomen, army, bodily health, bowels, chemists, chickens, craftsmen, skilled labor, disease, efficiency, food storage, groceries, healers, health inspectors, medical professionals, poultry, and relief efforts. Pisces themes would be alcohol, asylums, fish, chemicals, churches, disease, drugs, addiction, fishing industry, fog, gasoline, hospitals, mysticism, oil, auto, services in a way, shoes and feet, submarines and water. So in light of that, I would say the Virgo eclipse could be a redefinition of the workforce, maybe through the immigration sort of issues that are going on. Maybe ICE is deporting essential workers. Maybe ICE ends up deporting, skilled labor, and then there's a skilled labor shortage in the U.S. And maybe there's suddenly a shortage of construction workers, and maybe that affects the housing market by sort of the chain of cause and effect. So that could definitely come up. There could also be there could be an economic crisis of some kind. There could be a labor protest or a labor crisis vis-a-vis AI. Maybe people are concerned about AI replacing their jobs, especially administrators, right? Low skill labor could be increasingly displaced by AI. We could have a pandemic. To be honest, there could be a bird flu outbreak. There could be just a higher case of influenza or precedent, or sorry, not precedence, prevalence of it. We could also see food supplies being dumped because they are contaminated. We could see price increases due to that. We could see sort of dismantling of a health agency, especially now that RFK Jr. is at the helm of the whatever it is, the he's the health secretary or whatever. He could make great efforts or massive efforts to dismantle. I think the CDC has already lost like 700 employees since I last checked. So there could be like also an end to requirements of like mass vaccination. I think massive vaccination efforts will subside in many states. So I think the Alabama State Health Agency no longer requires mass vaccination. So that's kind of a Virgo Pisces theme. Um, we also have a different approach to inspection of things, like inspectors. I mean, again, I'm not saying it's good or bad that like the federal government's being dismantled. Like there's going to be unintended consequences of that and externalities for civilians. Like if the federal government loses like nuclear testers or they lose inspectors who check like lead in paint or the water or something, that could obviously affect the health. And like, so again, there's like many cascading impacts to all of this. But I think there could be some key inspectors who are no longer at the helm, either at the federal level or at a municipal level, and like that could really affect the quality of like air, pollution, water, building standards. I still think the LA streamlining of all the building standards is kind of weird. Like, okay, rebuild all the houses, obviously in the Palisades as quickly as possible, but do it in the right way. So I just continue to worry that, maybe there is a deregulation in some of the wrong areas. But again, and I am maybe revealing some of my bias here, but like, you know, maybe we do have too many administrators. I mean, I'm not making a blanket statement that like we should allow some like AI tool to just decide and do it in a faceless, inhumane way. I'm not trying to say that. But again, when I think back to my time in college, I do wonder if we needed that many administrators. We had like a department for pretty much every conceivable, student activity. But I don't know why the students couldn't figure that out themselves instead of employing people to do it. So, anyways, with Venus retrograde in Aries, juxtaposed with all of that, there is a bit more of a sense of like, do it on your own or figure it out on your own, whether good or bad. But that's the attitude. And with Neptune going into Aries, there will be this attitude of, hey, you should revere the person who figured it out on their own. With the eclipse and the Pisces energy as well, there could be some, again, prominent religious figure in critical condition. There could be protracted legal disputes between Trump and the judges, because of the Saturn Jupiter square. There could be some maritime conflict thanks to the Pisces energy. There could be oil spills or oil rig disasters, maritime shipments being blocked, especially in the Panama Canal. I think there's going to be a major decision made about the Panama Canal. Either the US will try to seize it or will be pushed away from it even. I actually think that there will be significant conflict at international like boundary lines, especially in the ocean. So Canada and the US might be into getting into some kind of conflict on the in the Atlantic Ocean, or maybe the US and Greenland gets into something along the ocean in one of those bays up north. And with sanctions on Iran, oil prices could skyrocket. The prices of goods could continue to increase in light of tariffs. There could be dysfunction at a jail where like prisoners escape. I could see that with the Pisces themes. Um, I'll just say it again. Frayed international relations definitely will be a theme, especially with the eclipse squaring Donald Trump's natal lunar eclipse. Because what I've noticed is like when the lunar nodes square your natal lunar nodes, it's just like a pivotal time for relationships. Because the square sort of creates like the Grand Cross to me will influence like all the pillars of your life, including relationships. So there could be retaliatory efforts by countries towards the US that cause supply chain bottlenecks. There could be sanctions against US goods or something. There could be the withholding of key materials necessary to provide healthcare in the US, meaning like there could be like a drug or pharmaceutical shortage. And there even could be like a crackdown on illegal drugs. But I could see there being shortages not only of like prescription drugs, but like, drugs that are coming across the border. Yeah, so there's a lot of health themes going on there. But again, like if there's a pandemic, it could really spring up around March 13th during that eclipse. If there was a labor crisis, would come up during the eclipse, meaning again, a shortage of skilled labor, especially manual labor. Maybe I don't think this would happen. I think this is kind of extreme, but maybe some doctors would like go on strike. I don't know why they would do that because I'm pretty sure doctors are like, I'm assuming most doctors think of themselves as like frontline workers. I mean, they're not going to like protest and not come to work. But I just think that like there will be a disassembly of health agencies and healthcare agencies during this time that really affects the provision of healthcare in the US. I also actually think with the Luigi Mangione um, thing happening in early December when the sun was squaring Saturn, the Sun Saturn conjunction in mid-March could bring up another healthcare related fiasco, we'll call it, in the news. Or some sort of healthcare CEO could be under the spotlight or implicated in some sort of like legal action. I think that it's very likely there's a lawsuit or legal action taken against a healthcare company or healthcare executive. But again, it's also highlighting chronic ailments generally, chronic conditions, potentially chronic conditions caused by certain products, certain pharmaceuticals, that were maybe not tested enough before they were um, brought to the entire public. And there's also a Saturn-Uranus sextile going on now, which is nice. It's the closing sextile before the 2032 conjunction of Saturn and Uranus in Gemini. And I think the closing sextile shows that there may be some productive ways to fuse your technology skills, technological skills with your long-term dreams. So to like create some kind of like amazing career for yourself. So like maybe you'll use social media to become an astrologer or something. Now we have the again total lunar eclipse in Virgo with the chart ruler Mercury stationing retrograde the next day. So remember, Virgo rules. Virgo is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is about to retrograde there. And the retrograde in Mercury, the retrograde in Aries is a time to reflect on your own independent thought, your independent educational process. It's a time to revisit conflicts that you did not resolve. It's a time to reflect on some kind of trail you can blaze intellectually. But with the Sun conjunct Saturn, I'll say it again, there could be a leader, president, prime minister who suffers a health setback. There could also be, like, yes, some kind of prominent figure who succumbs to maybe like a bird flu or some other virus or strain of bacteria that conjures a crisis. Maybe it sparks fear in the eyes of the populace because not because it's going to be a pandemic, but just because someone powerful died of it, right? Similar to how when like Idris Elba got COVID like early on, everyone was like, wow, or other celebrities were getting it. People were like freaking out, like, oh my God, this is affecting everybody. Like nobody's invincible. Like there's something kind of it's giving me that energy of like no one is invincible during this eclipse. It could also implicate like a celebrity, actually. There could be a celebrity scandal. Maybe there's something with Diddy coming up again. I think that might happen a little bit closer to like April 16th or 17th, though, when Mars is opposing his natal Mars. But anyways, the Sun-Saturn conjunction is, I think, painting a celebrity maybe in a bad light. There could be a celebrity being scrutinized, or there could be a drug cartel being reprimanded or caught for something, or apprehended, I should say. Um, or again, a celebrity being exposed for something nefarious. Because I think we're seeing how the illusion is continuing to disintegrate in society, especially with celebrity and mass media. I think a lot of people are waking up to even like maybe some lies that have been told in the media during this time, especially in order to defend certain entrenched interests, especially in the healthcare industry. And again, I don't want to like project my opinions onto this video, but yeah, I don't think I really have to, I guess, to make this statement. But with RFK Jr. like at the helm now and the health as the health secretary, it's like obviously he's probably going to mount some kind of retrospective, inquiry into the whole COVID pandemic and sort of the approaches that were taken. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some studies that are launched or results that are launched about, the approach that was taken to the pandemic and the rapidity of the rollout and everything. And there may be this sort of like unredacting of certain emails, email exchanges, and conversations between health experts that sow further distrust in the bureaucracy. So there's a weird dynamic contradictory tension going on where people are being kind of whipsawed around, where it's like we find evidence to hesitate. I think we find plenty of evidence to hesitate about believing in experts or that the experts have our best interests in mind. But then we also find counter evidence that it's really important to have safeguards in place. It's really important to have federal rules and regulations to make sure that like we know that when we buy a bottle of water that's not contaminated. But we also want to make sure that like when people roll out a new product and force it on the entire population that it's been properly tested. So it's like we want to make sure that all these boxes are checked. Like in an ideal society, we would all want to know that like this is what goes into our medical products. This is how it's been tested. This is how it benefits us or hurts us long term so that we can make informed decisions. And we would also like to know that like our food has been tested, our water has been tested. Like we all want the same thing. We all want safety, transparency, and clarity. And we also want some guidelines, but we also want some degree of independence and fluidity and control of our own lives and our own decisions. I mean, whether you're like a libertarian or a Democrat or a Republican, I think we all want some kind of mixture of like cooperation and autonomy, right? And so it's like up to you how you'd like to tip those scales. that's your prerogative. But I'm just saying, like, regardless of how you feel about RFK Jr., the fact is that I think that he will scale up some kind of investigation or inquiry into like various health agencies from especially their practices during the pandemic. Um, and the results might surprise people. I mean, maybe there will be some emails or exchanges that like really cast the prior administration in a bad light with regards to that. Or like maybe the suppression of social media posts that were conflicting the administration's policies at the time. But there could also be a disaster that strikes precisely because those administrations have been disassembled. So again, like I'm not here trying to insert political bias to try to make a prediction. Like RFK Jr. very well could identify and uproot legitimate corruption that surprises even people who were on the side of like mandating everything. But there could also be a use sort of a case study here in unintended consequences where RFK Jr. decides to gut an entire agency that therefore cascades into a lack of inspections of food supply that suddenly get millions of people sick. So like both possibilities are are honestly 50-50 in the eyes of an astrologer. A good astrologer. So if you listen to astrologers who like do nothing but berate like, anyone who they disagree with politically and they insert that and project that into their predictions, like I don't think you should listen to them in either direction. If you like listen to people who believe everyone is a lizard person and everybody is, all conspiracies are true, you got to take that with a grain of salt. But also, if you watch people who like treat every word from somebody as like, I don't know, existential crisis, like you should also question whether or not they have any sort of like perspective in place when it comes to like predicting crises. Like maybe their cortisol levels need to be checked and lowered. So like we all have to kind of like exercise this Jupiter and Gemini transit, right? And play to like both scenarios constantly and not be like, oh, this is definitely a good thing or this is definitely a bad thing. You might be surprised. Like I said, you might be surprised by what RFK Jr. can do to help or to hurt society. Like you just don't know. Like you literally cannot say for sure. So, anyways, without further ado. Oh, sorry. No. I have one more thing. I'm gonna have to go through the horoscopes quite quickly, by the way, for this version. I just have to do that because of time constraints. I have a lot of content that I have to produce. But the last thing I'll say about the global thematic trends is that we do have a solar partial eclipse in Aries, 9 degrees of Aries, on March 29th. This is the last eclipse in the Aries-Libra axis to happen during this Aries-Libra eclipse cycle that began in April of 2023. So what's interesting here is that it's at the ninth degree again, after the Pisces new moon was at 9 degrees, Aquarius, Capricorn, Sagittarius, Scorpio. All of those new moons were at 9 degrees. What is the ninth degree in astrology? It's a Sagittarian degree. What is Sagittarius about? It's about belief. So number one, if you have a lot of placements at any placements at 9 degrees of any signs, this is a big time for you from last November 4th, I believe, until March 29th. But also for everybody, it's reevaluating belief systems. And this one is resetting the sense of self in the context of relationships because it does build up to a Libra full moon 2 weeks later. So that Aries solar eclipse is a time for you to like really believe in ninth degree Sag, believe in yourself, assert yourself, and proceed forward with a self-confidence that allows for the best possible, most resonant relationships. So let's start to go into the horoscopes as I sit here like 2 hours in. Um, I have felt compelled for some reason to like really do a full scale analysis of March. I think because there's two eclipses happening during March. Like, and I'm actually I intentionally didn't really cover the solar eclipse in Aries all that much in this video because it's happening at the very end of the month. I want to focus more on the bulk of March, but I will tell you really quick before I go into my summary of March that the solar eclipse in Aries could plant the seeds for a war. of some kind. I mean, it doesn't have to be, it could even be the conclusion of a war. I mean, the Aries-Libra eclipses, were very much about, wars between Russia and Ukraine, the conflict between Israel and Gaza, especially when you think about the Aries eclipse in April of 2024, very much coincided with conflicts in the Middle East. And I think and obviously October 7th of 2023 was right before a solar eclipse in Libra. So the solar eclipse in Aries will either uh, begin the end of a war or it will begin a new war as the other one ends. But that's more likely, I think, what will happen. Because the lunar, or sorry, not the lunar, the full moon in Libra, April 12th, ruled by Venus, stationing direct conjunct Saturn, and Neptune in the North Node is showing that very much a long-term war could end. A long-term war could end. There could be a peace treaty around April 12th between, let's say, Ukraine and Russia, Israel and Gaza, between maybe there's some kind of alliance between even like the US and Russia or something. But in the wake of that appeasement and that peace and that accord, I do believe that another war could or conflict could spark up. And it's because April of 2026 is a wartime month. I want to go to that time. I might as well just go all in on this on this show today. So April 12th. Let's go to April 17th of 2026. Let's just take a look at that. I mean, almost every planet in the sky is in Aries, except for, Venus, Uranus, Jupiter, Pluto. That's sacrificial. Mars and Saturn is disciplining, is fighting in a disciplined manner, fighting for a government, fighting for a military group. Most people I've done readings for who have military experience have a Mars Saturn aspect in their charts, like conjunction square opposition. What else is happening here? Neptune, sacrifice. Neptune is about sacrifice in many ways, giving to a cause, donating to a cause, but like really sacrificing the self in Aries for a cause. And people are rallying behind maybe a state that's trying to secede. I think a state might secede at that time. And the North and South node are squaring Aldebaran and Antares, which are fixed stars associated with the Crusades, ideological battles. So we're talking about a full-scale war in April of 2026. I continue to feel that there will be some kind of war. I don't know if it's between the US and Canada or US and Europe or Russia and, Ukraine again or something, but it does feel to me that there's a war, primarily though along religious lines, actually. Whether it's overt or covert, I think it has a lot to do with religion. So it could be a war between Islam and Christianity or East and West. I mean, there's a lot of different ideological divisions, lines of division, but that is my least favorite time of the 21st century, probably. And I'm not saying it's guaranteed to happen. Maybe people are just aggressive at that time. But like the new moon right there is conjunct Chiron. I mean, how much more literal can you get? It could be other things, but if you're a practicing astrologer and you look at this chart and you realize that Aries is the sign of war, even if you are a Vedic astrologer and you think this is all happening in Pisces, you still have Mars associated with war, conjunct Saturn, which is about, regular like institutions, governments. Neptune sacrifice, right? So whether you just are an aspectarian astrologer, as I like to say, which I kind of am an aspectarian astrologer, which is like a term I just like to use to signify that I focus on aspects more than zodiac signs anyways. I put like 80% weight on the aspect and 20% weight on the zodiac sign, which is way, way more emphatically towards the aspects than most astrologers. But I think, again, that's why I do some of the best readings in the world, is because when someone comes to see me, I don't say any generic stuff about like, you're a Libra rising, so you're amenable to everybody. It's like if you're a Gen X Libra rising with Pluto on your ascendant, you're going to be Plutonic. You're going to associate a lot more with Scorpio traits. So, I'm not saying that tropical zodiac is meaningless, but if you're an astrologer who's like hanging your hat on the meaning behind all the zodiac signs over and above the aspects that are going on, I think you're making a big mistake. I mean, I think that Uranus and Taurus obviously has played out as like, changes in like, valuation and money and like the earth and whatnot. But I still think, the fact that a lot of like the fact that we had that crazy event at Trump's rally in Pennsylvania, July 13th of last year, is more so because Mars and Uranus were meeting. It's the aspect, right? And on his midheaven, by the way. So aspects mean a lot more to me. So even if you're like, I don't think Aries has to be about war, you still have Mars, Neptune, Saturn, Mercury conjunct, which is like, to me, well, that right there on April 17th is like a Titanic. It's like a crash. It's maybe like a ship crashing into something, right? Maybe it's I don't know. I don't want to try to channel that time right now. It's a little too dark. Let me go back to the summary here of March. So March contains multitudes, right? That is the quickest way I can phrase it. March contains two eclipses that will reset the tone, especially for the mutable signs in the case of the Virgo eclipse, and for the solar eclipse in Aries for the cardinal signs. But I'm going to walk through what those two eclipses mean for each zodiac sign now. And only those eclipses. I'm going to keep it really short because, again, I have limited time to make this video. I'm already actually way over time. I don't want to see anyone in the comments complaining that the horoscopes are short because I already have 2025 horoscopes available on my website, which already contains all the insights for the year ahead. And I also, yeah, I just don't. I think that I've given you enough tools already to navigate the month, honestly. The horoscopes are merely a bonus. So let's just do that. And again, like I appreciate you, obviously. If you're here watching this, like I do appreciate you. So I'm not trying to create any negative energy here, but like I've just noticed a lot more complaints than usual on the horoscope stuff. Not because they're inaccurate, but just because like I'm seemingly winging it or something or mailing it in. But for anyone who complains, like just recognize that astrologers, social media creators, we're making multiple videos a day, all day. So for years on end. So it's like, well, we get a lot of value out of that. We find it rewarding, right? And we are rewarded for it often. It's like, I'm not asking for pity, but it's like you have to put that in perspective. When you watch my video or anyone else's video, you have to like show a little bit of respect there for the amount of content that we push out. So let's go to the month of March. I'm going to park it at the eclipse. Again, I'm going to be really brief here, but start off with Aries. So for Aries, you have the lunar eclipse in Virgo in the sixth house on March 13th, 14th. So for Aries, the lunar eclipse is going to reveal maybe a job that you no longer want because like the South Node is a release point. You could release a job you don't want. You could release a perfectionist tendency. You could release and transition to a new health practice. You could experience a change with a pet, honestly, or you're maybe adopting a pet or something, but you could even complete a work project. But I think for a lot of Aries, you're just letting go of a certain lifestyle or routine that was not conducive to productivity or good health. And then the solar eclipse in Aries on March 29th is a redefinition of self in the context of relationships. So for Aries, like by the end of March, you're going to feel like really in yourself, you're going to be feeling like your authentic self, and you'll be getting ready for not a lunar eclipse, but a full moon in Libra on April 12th that allows you to purge any relationships that just like aren't resonating with who you are. And with all the transits in Pisces during this month, you are continuing to go through a mental health journey and releasing any addictions, ideally. I know that it's easier said than done, but like releasing any addictive habits. You will have to manage your communication all month, and you will be reflecting on old relationships, I think, during Venus retrograde. For Taurus, the lunar eclipse in Virgo, really good for you. Great time to reset your creative hobbies, complete a creative project, or to just reconceptualize the way you approach creativity. I think it is really powerful. When I think about the South Nodal lunar eclipse I experienced in my fifth house a couple of years ago as a Cancer rising, it allowed me to reset the way I make videos on TikTok. I started making different types of videos that expanded my audience. So the fifth house lunar eclipse can be great for you. It could also be major transition in your romantic life. Maybe you are letting go of a situationship, but I think for a lot of you, it's just a redefinition of your creativity. Some of you might let go of perfectionist tendencies that were getting in the way of a creative project or stymieing your connection to maybe your children or your family. The Aries solar eclipse, March 29th, is planting the seeds for a different approach to mental health, spiritual practices, and sleep habits. You might just come up with a more healthy spiritual routine to deal with any anger issues. And with all the retrogrades and placements in Pisces, ideally this month you are starting to find a more stable friend group or community or social media tactic. For Geminis, the Virgo lunar eclipse on March 14th, 13th is resetting the tone in your home and family. You could move, you could decide to relate to your family differently. You could let go of any nitpicking that was blocking any kind of rapport within your family. So you could smooth out family dynamics by letting go of the stuff that doesn't matter. You could adopt a new lifestyle, a routine within your home. You could create a different workspace within your home. Yeah, you could move or relocate. You could just like reorganize your home to be more productive. And by the way, this eclipse is a climax of something that started on September 2nd of last year. With the solar eclipse in Aries on March 29th in your 11th house, you are setting a new tone in your friend groups, communities on social media as well. You could also, with the retrogrades there, be reflecting on friendships that you'd like to keep versus ones you'd like to let go of. You'd like to reflect maybe on how you convey your values on social media. With all the transits in Pisces, this is a big month for your career progress, and commitment in your career, or as a parent. Some Pisces or some Geminis are becoming parents. Let me go backwards a day. So Cancers. The Virgo eclipse, March 13th, 14th, is in the third house. This could really help you complete a writing project, communications project. Something big could happen for you in any kind of educational or communications environment. You could be traveling, you could be learning something new, you could be teaching, you could be relating with siblings completely differently, but you could also really dive into your expertise actually, or let go of a perfectionist tendency to finally teach something to people and finally provide your expertise. With all the transits in Pisces this month too, it is a time where you are either taking long distance trips, journeys, or really tapping into your capacity as a thought leader. The solar eclipse in Aries on March 29th is a new beginning in your career, or you are announcing something related to parenting, or becoming a parent, or maybe you are, finally, I don't know, just dealing with a parent differently, conceiving of your parents differently, and adopting maybe a more independent stance in your career, maybe rethinking entrepreneurship or more solidly becoming an entrepreneur. And by the way, with Mars in your first house, you are continuing to manage tension and stress, although hopefully you are getting better and better at it with Mars now direct, meaning you will have more energy. Leo's, the Virgo lunar eclipse, March 13th, 14th, will help you maybe release any values that are outdated, help you reach a financial milestone, can help reveal to you the resources that you have on hand, what you'd like to do with your finances and money. It could also help you walk away from a job that you don't want anymore. You could have a new perspective on what your values are. So maybe you transition from more materialistic to not. You could also, with the transits in Pisces, be focused on your investments generally, business, shared and assets with a partner, business reconsolidation or recreation or restructuring. You could also focus on ways to cut back on indulgences, I think, with the full moon in the second, and sacrifice any habits that were contributing to bad health. And there's the solar eclipse in Aries in the ninth house, March 29th, could bring you to a totally new location by virtue of traveling. You could just basically travel somewhere, attend a new higher educational environment or adopt a new philosophical perspective on something. Or, some of you could be teaching something new or engaging in a new publication or marketing or advertising effort. Virgos, I mean, big for you because the lunar eclipse is in the first house, so huge month. March 13th, you're getting really emotional. You're releasing and letting go of anything that was too kind of granular, microscopic, and obfuscating or, sorry, kind of cluttering up the big picture for you. Like maybe some Virgos have not been seeing the bird's eye view of something because they've been too focused on the details. And suddenly they wake up to the fact that they don't like their job anymore. They don't like the mundane aspects of it, or they don't like where their health is at. They want to change that. Or maybe they realize that, they'd like to, just let go of a relationship or a habit or let go of, again, any perfectionist tendency or self-consciousness that gets in the way of like having the best possible relationships too, because you've got a lot of stuff going on in Pisces in your seventh house this month. So Virgos are actually the most likely to release maybe some sort of nitpicky sort of grievance that they have with someone in order to finally forgive them and reunite with them and like recultivate, nurture the relationship again. I say again because Venus will retrograde into your seventh house. And then when Aries, the solar eclipse happens in the eighth house, you might be adopting a new stance on your investments or shadow work. You might be doing some shadow work, investigating the type of merging you'd like to do with somebody, whether it's physical intimacy, financial connection, and so on. And yeah, Virgos, I mean, you're really vulnerable this month. So really, watch your health, watch your emotional health, physical health, make sure that you're supported by people. And again, let go of the small, minute details in order to like really find that divine connection with someone. So now we have Libra. Libra, you have the Virgo lunar eclipse March 13th in your 12th house. This is a very spiritual domain to have a lunar eclipse, and it's very much about letting go. So you definitely could be letting go, releasing addictions, anything that was blocking positive like mental health outcomes, or nighttime habits are changing for you. Maybe could just have like a really, really profound dream at that time. And this would be a great full moon for you to rest, relax, release, take a bath. And there's a lot of stuff going on in Pisces this month, which is going to have you reflecting on health, physical health, work process, pets, also maybe the health of your pets, your commitment to excellence, the stuff you'd like to be doing every day. Maybe you're reconnecting with coworkers. And the solar eclipse in Aries at the end of the month is going to set a completely new dynamic in your significant relationships. So Libra and Virgo risings are the most likely to reevaluate everything about their relationships. Uh, and then we have Scorpios. Scorpios, the lunar eclipse in Virgo is in your 11th house of friendships, communities, social media. So Scorpio, you could be letting go of a friendship, having an emotional connection with a friend. New community could present itself to you, especially one that's more health conscious. You could learn a lot more about health, maybe through social media. You could be providing for your friends in a different way, in a more selfless way. A lot of stuff going on in your fifth house this month. So you are reflecting on creative projects, creative processes, and the whole topic of like children and also the inner child and how to cultivate that through creativity or by having children. You could also take a different approach to dating and romance. And then with the solar eclipse in Aries in the sixth house at the end of March, maybe you will start to tackle your health very differently and your lifestyle. And you will start to go about your day-to-day very differently to optimize health and productivity at work. Sagittarius, the lunar eclipse in Virgo, is in your 10th house in mid-March. That is monumental for you. This could signify a reset of your career, public vocation, parental roles. You could have a big emotional change in dynamic with a parent, but a lot of you are transitioning into a new career. You're realizing you no longer resonate with a career, or you want to eliminate the mundane, boring details and aspects of a career in order to do something more fun. With so much happening in Pisces in your fourth house this month, some of you can move, think about your home differently. You could also, maybe realize that there's some kind of family health issue at play. Same with Geminis. But a lot of you, I think, are really trying to find the right place to live, the right place to move, or how you'd like to decorate your home, and also find your true calling. With the Aries solar eclipse, the end of the month in the fifth house, you could pick up a totally new creative hobby or creative project, and maybe even there's a date that you go on in April, or sorry, late March that really brings in this sort of passion again. So Capricorn's lunar eclipse is in the ninth house of higher learning and travel. I think for Capricorns, it's a great time to take a trip actually and see what inspires you. I think a lot of Capricorns are maybe wondering if they should move or travel somewhere. I know that like moving is more in the fourth house with Saturn and you have Saturn in the third, but a lot of you are about to have Saturn in your fourth, right? Or actually all Capricorns are technically going to have Saturn in the fourth house aspects to their signs soon. So once Saturn goes into Aries in May, I mean, you're totally liable to potentially want to move. You might want to do that. So this lunar eclipse in March could be traveling somewhere that eventually sparks your interest to move. And you're not getting along with a lot of people right now with Mars in the seventh. So maybe you're like, hey, get me out of here. Let's travel and move somewhere else eventually. So you're at least exploring at this time. You could also reach a big achievement in your educational life. You could just adopt a new perspective on things or reach a milestone with a marketing, advertising, or publication effort. With so much happening in your third house in Pisces this month, you might be reflecting on siblings, neighbors, writing, learning, local travel as well, communication, expertise, building your expertise. And with the solar eclipse in Aries on at the end of March in your fourth house, maybe even then, you start to think about moving. Yeah. Not that you have to move. And most astrologers would say don't move on an eclipse. I agree with that. But I still think at the end of the month, you're starting to entertain the idea of maybe moving or starting a family or doing something different with your home and caregiving process. Aquarius, the lunar eclipse in Virgo is in your eighth house. This is a release and a letting go of any financial instruments or strategies that were not working for you anymore. You could uncouple from someone financially, physically, psychically, emotionally. You could have a psychic moment. You could do shadow work. You could actually, in some cases, maybe you decide that you want to merge with somebody in those ways, right? With so much happening in your second house this month, you're also reflecting on your financial targets, salary, financial goals, self-worth, and natural talents. And I think you're trying to start working on something that is more in alignment with your natural talents now. And also, maybe you're dissatisfied with Saturn in the second. You're dissatisfied maybe about your finances and you want to improve those. With the solar eclipse in Aries happening at the end of the month in the third, some of you might start to learn about something to close a skills gap so that you can make money doing what you love, or you'll travel somewhere locally, or your dynamic with a sibling will change drastically. Yeah, that checks actually with the Aquarius risings, I know. You might just have like a totally new dynamic with a sibling, even. Pisces finishing strong here with the lunar eclipse in your seventh house. So, Pisces, you are absolutely letting go of relationships that are not meeting the mark. They're not good enough, they're not meeting your standards, but you're also letting go of your own nitpicking tendencies, possibly, to realize how much you appreciate somebody. So maybe you're practicing greater gratitude to welcome a new relationship or an old one into your life, probably an old one because Venus is retrograde, or to realize that you like to hold on to a relationship. But a lot of Pisces will also break up during this time because Venus will retrograde back to Saturn in Pisces. But I still think for a lot of you, this is an opportune eclipse to let go of something that maybe is causing damage to a relationship where it's somewhat self-inflicted by virtue of your own nitpicking. Um, but others will break up or let go of someone at that time. Again, with so much happening in Pisces this month, you will absolutely be redefining yourself, re-evaluating your style, your appearance, your approach to life, the way you present yourself, your job, your goals, your connections, all of the above. And obviously, and ideally, after this eclipse, you have more solid relationships that are not steeped in self-criticism or criticism of the other. So the Aries solar eclipse is March 29th in your second house. That is helping you see the strength in your own self-worth, helping you adopt maybe more independent financial stance or ability or resources, helping you own your natural talents, your raw talents, so that you can deploy them more obviously in your job. And yeah, you're going to self-actualize over time here with the North Node in the first. It'll take the whole time while the North Node's in Pisces through mid-2026. But you're starting to self-actualize by letting go of relationships that are boring or mundane or not growth-oriented, and also reconciling with people by forgiving them or letting go of the marginal concerns. So I know this was stocked with a lot of insight regarding global events and high-level trends and a lot thinner with regards to the horoscopes. I personally am fine with that because I've already given you all the insights in my horoscopes. Download the 2025 horoscopes if you haven't yet. Over 10,000 if you, almost 11,000 if you have. So almost 11,000 people already have the answers that you were looking for in this YouTube video that you were waiting for. So just go download the video. But thank you so much. I'm Evan Nathaniel Grimm, and I do hope you have a phenomenal month of March. And I do believe you can navigate both of these eclipses. They can be welcome resets by virtue of the fact that you let go of what, again, the petty concerns, let go of the nitpicking, um, not trying so hard to defend everybody, watching out for yourself to some extent in a healthy way, and then allowing yourself to sort of reconvene with yourself, restore your energy, restore your strength, and then go back into the relationships with a healthy, independent footing. So thank you so much and take care.